All right, so pests. Birds are a huge pest. So birds, and not everywhere, birds aren't a huge pest everywhere. But birds are a major issue for us from veraison to harvest during ripening when the fruit changes color. So right when the fruit changes color, especially in the reds, the birds can see that color change and then they start to come down and attack our fruit. They can peck the fruit or they can eat whole fruit. The biggest issue that I see with birds is really pecking because when they peck the fruit, then it opens it up for fungal disease as well as things like the Drosophila, the fruit flies coming in and vectoring Acetobacter, creating volatile acidity in the vineyard, but also things like wasps can come in and start eating in the fruit and getting into those things, and also vectoring probably Acetobacter on their little legs and stuff. Yeah, so it's just really gnarly. So yeah, some birds will peck at it, the smaller birds will peck. Other kind of larger birds will take whole fruit, and then of course you see yield reductions. Turkeys are a major one. They get underneath and they just like pull clusters with their stupid turkey mouths, and then cause massive yield reductions. Turkeys, though, however, maybe not so bad because then you can go out and shoot it, and then you've got Thanksgiving dinner. So, yeah. And the good thing is, too, actually with turkeys, if you do shoot turkeys, they tend to not come back to that area. In my experience, they tend to be pretty aware of what just happened and they leave. The other like flocks of birds that fly and stuff, they'll keep coming back if you shoot. So shooting doesn't really work for them. So these are the management strategies that we can use. So exclusion is our most effective tool. So we'll use bird netting, which I'm going to show you. Frightening is pretty effective, but they can get used to frightening. Birds are pretty smart. The term bird brain is actually pretty derogatory towards birds. They're very, very smart. If you're curious about that, you should watch there's a documentary called A Murder of Crows about crows in particular. So crows are incredibly smart, can solve like complex puzzles and stuff. One of the things crows do, by the way, just as an aside, crows, often people thought that crows were mourning the death of their mates and stuff, like in the flock, a crow would die and then all these crows would stand around it and they do this kind of mourning ritual. It actually turns out it's probably an investigation. They're probably investigating how that crow died. So they're very, very smart. So because birds are so smart, they do understand frightening. So what happens with frightening is we have to change things up on them. So we have to, every few days, we have to change the method that we're using in order to keep scaring birds off. Shooting can be used against like flocks, large flocks where you could shoot buckshot up into a flock. There are some legal issues around doing that. Oftentimes what you're really doing with shooting is just frightening birds. It's not terribly efficient, so I don't recommend anybody doing that. And habitat modification really doesn't seem to work at all for birds. So it's really just kind of frightening and exclusion that we can do. So exclusion looks like this. These are bird nets. There's different ways of doing this. This is side netting, which is often what you'll see here in the Finger Lakes. It has more to do with the capital expenditure of the net itself, as why people would choose to use side nets. The reality is it's actually relatively inefficient. And so what you'll see in areas that have heavy bird pressure, like in New Zealand, is often over-the-row netting like this, like draped net, that we just deploy and then, drape it on the ground. Or over-the-row netting, and this is what you see in New Zealand. So New Zealand is a nation of birds. New Zealand has one native mammal. It's a bat. There are other mammals there, but they were introduced by the English, essentially for like fur trades and stuff like that. And those native mammals have become huge ecological problems for the country. So one thing we talk about in New Zealand is we call possums New Zealand's little speed bumps. So it's your civic duty to kind of like go out of your way and hit a possum on the road. Because there's about something like 60 million possums in the country, and they do things like eat kiwi eggs. So hugely problematic. But yeah, it's a country of birds. So that's why in New Zealand you have these ridiculous flightless birds that really probably shouldn't exist. But they haven't had, historically, those birds haven't had these like possums and stuff to deal with. So they could just be flightless, small little flightless birds that would put their eggs on the ground because they had nothing else to predate them. So there's a ton of birds there. So essentially all the red grapes in New Zealand get netted. If you don't net then you're going to get all your fruit's going to get stolen by birds. These things are these are bird cannons. They're very loud. So it's a propane tank attached to like a regulator up here and a piezoelectric lighter, like you have on a grill, and then they're programmed to go off at kind of random times throughout the day, and you'll generally program them to go on at like dawn for 3 hours, and then like around 3 hours before dusk, because that's generally when the birds are feeding, and they kind of go off at random intervals. It sounds like a gun is going off. And this is another scaring device, which is called Bird Guard, which in this box is like the audio files for the sounds of like hawks and like dying birds and that sort of thing. And that kind of scares off birds. It's pretty cool. We can also use the wacky inflatable arm man that you have at car dealerships. These actually scare off birds pretty well. So we attach it to a generator, turn it on for like 3 days, turn it off, then maybe turn on the Bird Guard for 3 days, turn it off, then maybe turn on the bird cannon for 3 days and turn it off, and just alternating our strategies so that the birds don't get used to it. Falconry works as well. It's also just super dope because you can feel like you're in Game of Thrones, and you've got some guy that's clearly named like Lazarus or something, and he's got Falcor that he can just launch around the vineyard, which is pretty neat. Falcons can do roughly 500 acres effectively and scare birds off. Of course it's expensive because you need to have a falconer and all this stuff, but it's not. It's kind of a nice option when you don't want to be disruptive to your neighbors or disruptive to your tasting room. So you do see this being used to some extent in California on the high end. Deer are a big problem. Mostly, I would say, an issue early season with the early season growth. They'll get out their little succulent shoots, and yeah, it's just a big problem. They can eat fruit. I haven't personally seen them eat fruit ever, but there are some people here in the Finger Lakes who said that the deer have actually gone after their fruit after veraison. So that is an issue. But I'd say it's really more of an issue on the little succulent growth. And they can do things like this. Like this is a brand new vine that's been just completely nibbled down past the nodes. There may not be anything to prune to in the winter here. You may actually have to just replace this vine altogether. So that can be hugely problematic. And there it is on an older vine where they've cut down the shoots. So yeah, and there's probably a deer right before it became dinner. So what do we do with deer? Exclusion, again, is the best method. So we have to put up very expensive deer fencing around the property. We can shoot as well, and sometimes it has to be done, but it's not really the most. Shooting is not your go-to method because it's not super efficient or effective. But sometimes the deer just gets trapped in your deer fence, and then you just got to shoot it. So you go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife or whatever and ask for a tag to shoot the deer. The end of this lecture, and then we'll pick it up on the next lecture with part 2. So what is the most effective bird management strategy? Scaring, habitat modification, exclusion, or shooting? Cool. You guys nailed it again. Great. Awesome. Well done, Team Stream. All right, so that's the lecture for today.